Hello and welcome to Contagion, Dr. Rohde. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks, Grant. It's a great pleasure to be here and an honor. I appreciate Contagion for having me on.
So, to get us started, could you tell our audience a bit about what you do, your background, and what that looked like before the pandemic started?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Rodney E. Rohde. Right now, I am chair and professor at Texas State University in the College of Health Professions of the Clinical Lab Science program. I wear quite a few hats there. I'm also the research dean for the entire College of Health Professions. So I help mentor faculty in different research projects, other allied health professions like nursing and respiratory care, things like that. And then most recently, I became the associate director for the Translational Health Research Center at Texas State. We have we're pushing 250 or more faculty now that do translational health. So, more applied research that can be translated across multiple disciplines. And that's kind of a big idea, specialty area for Texas State. If I might, just a little bit of kind of history and background, kind of leading up to this question. So, my degrees are basically in microbiology. I did a master's in virology and then a PhD in really in kind of the public health space. And I did about a decade prior to working at Texas State. I spent about a decade at the Texas Department of Health State Services in the Bureau of Labs and the Zoonosis Control Division, really cut my teeth on infectious disease there. So I like to describe myself as a hybrid professional. I spent about a decade in public health, both in the laboratory. I had an amazing career there where I was really at the right place at the right time. We had an epizootic, which is an outbreak in animals of rabies in Texas. And so I was on the inaugural team with the Zoonosis Control Division, and it was an international team with Canada, CDC. We used parts of the Mexico Health Services and even the Texas National Guard. And we started dropping aerial vaccines that had recombinant vaccine. And the idea was you immunize the coyotes and the foxes and things like that to prevent rabies in animals. We'd had 3 deaths at the time back in the late 80s and early 90s, and that's still going. So we started doing that. It was approaching San Antonio, so there was real concern. And now it's pushed out of Texas. We haven't had a case of canine rabies in 15 years. So we basically eliminated canine rabies. And that was my first 10 years of my career. So as a new graduate, you can imagine what a profound impact that had on my career path. And then in 2002 is when I switched back to Texas State, my alma mater, and had that opportunity to kind of rise up through the ranks and reach where I'm at now. And so I feel like I had one foot really in both worlds. I have one in healthcare as a medical laboratory professional, and then the other foot is solidly planted still in public health. I still do research, and I just published a book last year on rabies, so I'm still working in that world too. So I couldn't be more happy with kind of the way my career progressed. And so I share that a lot with my students and colleagues because you never really know where your path's going to lead, and mine has certainly led me in a wonderful area, great colleagues and things like that.
Well, that actually gets to some of what you talk about. I reached out, or we started talking after you published this article in Forbes that we'll touch on in a few minutes.
Sure.
But part of what you're talking about in there is that a lot of people who are interested in the medical sciences or who might be interested in infectious diseases don't know that much about, outside of the clinical side,
Right.
what their options are for studying things like virology or other laboratory research.
Yeah. So this is an ongoing professional issue for the medical lab profession, and it's one I'm passionate about, and many of my colleagues are. And I think I have a unique perspective. I talk about this a lot with my friends and colleagues and students. So I didn't know about medical laboratory science when I was getting my bachelor's degree. My bachelor's degree is in microbiology, more out of the biological sciences area, as well as my master's in virology. So this program that I'm at now, the chair of it, was literally across the street from the Department of Biology, and I really never heard about it. So it's just an issue of if you don't typically have a relative that's worked in the hospital or healthcare arena, or you don't come across it through an advisor or something like that, then you probably are not going to hear about it. I like to talk about this issue in terms of kind of an upstream problem, and you probably would understand this if you're say you're a junior high kid, or even a middle school kid, or a high school kid. If you love science and you love math and you love being kind of a detective in those areas, typically, and there's nothing wrong with this, but typically you're going to be steered to pre-med, you're going to be steered to nursing, you're going to be steered to the kind of the hard areas of chemistry and maybe engineering and things like that. Rarely, it's kind of rare that I run across an advisor or a counselor or a teacher even in those lower kindergarten to 12th grade kind of areas that know about our profession. So you have that upstream problem. They just don't hear about it unless your parent works in the hospital or a relative or something like that. And then you have the downstream problem. So once you get out there, I'd be interested to know if you'd really heard about us. I mean, so when I talk to the public, when you go to see your primary care physician, or you go to the hospital, or you go to the ER, you do not see us. We are behind biohazard doors. We're in medical laboratories. We're performing, amazing complex tests. But you see the frontline patient care people, so nursing, physicians, maybe even physical therapy, maybe even pharmacists, but you don't see us. So those two issues, that upstream and downstream kind of problem, is kind of an antagonistic spiral downward for us. And so people like me, I've been doing this for about 18 years now, and I am passionate about getting the word out about this profession. Many of my colleagues are as well. Coming on your show is a fantastic opportunity for me to share that, and I appreciate it. But it's
And
it's an ongoing thing, with respect to writing, speaking, and being ready to do that when someone asks you.
and I can actually speak to what you were saying. You asked me about had I heard of it, and as a journalist who works in this field, I've written about plenty of PCRs. I've written about serological assays,
Sure.
but did I ever? This might be my first time interviewing somebody who
Yeah.
actually is involved in the process of running those tests. It seems almost like um, it almost feels like they happen by magic if you're not
Yeah.
paying attention.
And I think it's a natural mistake. I mean, people think that physicians do that testing. I mean, they're there at the bedside, or a nurse, and they actually do not have the credentials. I mean, I speak about it in the article, we spend it goes from an associate's degree, which is a medical lab technician, to a medical lab scientist, which is a bachelor's trained person. We have plenty of master's degrees, trained people that kind of get at specializations. And then now we have a fantastic opportunity. We have the brand new doctorate in clinical lab science, the DCLS. There's several universities offering that now, Rutgers and UTMB Galveston and Kansas Medical Center. And we're hoping those grow. That level of person will be like a PharmD. So they'll be interacting, and they're already out there. We have handfuls of them now working. They'll be working still in the lab, but they will be rounding with physicians with patient care. They'll be doing that critical kind of pre-analytical, what's the best test? Because sometimes physicians just don't know it. They actually have only a few hours of laboratory medicine in medical school, believe it or not. So we are the experts when it comes to laboratory medicine, both on the front end, kind of predicting the best test, and on the back end of interpretation of the test. I mean, and you can ask physicians if you have one on. Many of them need our help, and they love our help because they have so much to do. And so the interpretation of these complex serological assays, like you mentioned, are molecular diagnostics, which is changing. I mean, I can barely keep up now as a professor. It's so rapid, and so you need a focus. Testing can save a life, and it can also take someone out if you don't do it correctly. So it's a very critical and exciting career path if you find out about it. And it's really, we don't want to compete with majors, but we certainly promote our major sometime. It's a natural pre-med. So you could literally come our route. instead of a traditional pre-med route, get all of this amazing background in laboratory medicine. I mean, we do clinical chemistry, immunohematology, which is blood banking, clinical microbiology, which is my background, clinical chemistry, so all the panels for cholesterol and lipids, and it's really complex. It's not a simple thing. And then immunology and statistics on how to correlate and validate equipment. I mean, we're really the gatekeepers for quality laboratory testing. And I know you have it in your probably in your interview, but that's part of the article is discussing how with all of the stuff going on right now with COVID, with this pandemic, we're a little uneasy at times when we see another test pop up, and it's those really need to be evaluated carefully. Otherwise, you're basically flipping a coin, which is no
We're
good.
we're absolutely seeing different tests come back with a pretty wide range
Yeah.
of specificity and
Yeah.
such.
And now think about the physician who's trying to figure out which test to order. If they have 30 tests on a platform for detection, and they don't understand the sensitivity and specificity, the clinical sensitivity and specificity, they can make really bad decisions and not even know it. So it may not even be their fault because, I mean, it's hard enough for people like me to keep up with 20 or 30, emergency use authorization tests from FDA. I mean, typically, if it's not a pandemic emergency or other outbreaks, you're spending quite a bit of time. For example, one of the things that's kind of in the weeds that many people don't understand, when you're validating these types of tests, you typically need enough samples of different positivity and negativity so that you get a nice range of kind of a depth and a breadth of what that analytical sensitivity and specificity is. If you only look at strong positives, how do you know if it's going to pick up a really weak positive? And you also need to be running that. Some of these assays that are coming out only have 30 or 40 samples. That's the very bottom minimum number that you can kind of look at. I mean, you typically want to do hundreds of samples to kind of look at all those cross-reactive issues. I mean, what if an assay turns up positive when you have respiratory syncytial virus or flu or some other normal common cold virus? You don't know it. It's just positive. And so you don't really know if that person has had COVID or not. And now you're sending them back to work or you're not admitting to the hospital. I mean, there's just all sorts of medical decision issues there that worry us.
Absolutely, and I mean, I was writing my own article about, with the number of tests there are and the different problems that these false negatives can introduce. But in terms of what people in this role are doing around the country, I mean, could you go in a little bit more about what their involvement in the pandemic response looks like now and maybe what needs to change to better, in terms of the visibility and role of laboratory professionals
Mhm.
in this pandemic to better adapt our healthcare system?
Sure, I appreciate that question. First of all, let me start in the context that it takes, a diverse team of experts. So I just want to say that up front. We need all the expert, brilliant physicians and researchers and nursing and respiratory therapists. I mean, you need those whole uh, myriad of professionals helping patient when you're talking about something like this pandemic and in other testing cycles. But with regards to this particular issue, I really think what you're seeing with a light, kind of being shined on the medical lab professional, because what people don't understand, and I mentioned in the article, is first of all the visibility issue. So nobody really knows who we are. I think a lot of people think that if you have the capability to produce or manufacture 1 million tests, let's say, for Texas, and then we should be able to run them, right? We should be able to run them because we have them. Well, that's not the case. We don't have enough professionals to run that type of number constantly. I mean, now it can be done with planning and kind of setting it up in the right way, but just to have it happen overnight is not going to happen. I mentioned in the article we have there's about 9,100 jobs available in any given year in the U.S. for us, for the medical lab professional. And we graduate about 4,900 associates and bachelor level professionals. So that's about almost a 50% vacancy rate. I mean, we are constantly trying to fill those gaps. And this gets into stuff that's a little bit in the article, and we may not want to go into the weeds on this, but we've lost programs over the years. I mean, at one time our professional organization was 20,000 strong, and now we struggle to keep 6 or 7,000 members a year. So that has to do with a lot of stuff, funding for programs. They're kind of expensive because you have to have the real deal when you're training these students. You have to have the reagents, you have to have the automation, you have to have the clinical internships, which is a limiting factor in a hospital. So that's getting a little bit into the weeds, but that's why we have shortages. And the other issue, I think, is that people just need to realize that we need to be on the team. We have a lot of outstanding medical lab professionals at all levels, all backgrounds of degrees and credentials. I didn't mention earlier, but every one of us has to sit for a license or a certification. So you can't be. I joke with a internationally renowned microbiologist across the street from my university. He's an amazing microbiologist that studies biofilms, PhD. Just an amazing guy. But he couldn't even come over and teach my labs. He does not have a credential as a medical lab scientist. And it's so different than being, and I can say this, I went this route. A microbiology major is not prepared to know clinical microbiology the way we teach it and get you ready. It's just a whole different world to understand that differential testing process, and it's all about diagnostics. And so it's applied medical micro. But yeah, so I think our role is visibility and being at the table, especially when we're getting into these testing issues, as you mentioned. So ASCP and ASCLS, my two primary professional orgs, has called on Congress and the president to, have a national testing strategy. We just got great news this past week where about I believe it's $25 billion in this recent release is going to be dedicated to the laboratory. This is great news for us. So hopefully we'll be at the table and we'll be consulted along with physicians and researchers and manufacturers like Abbott and all the others that are out there that want to do the best for patient care. We definitely need to be at the table.
So, is there anything else that you want to share with infectious disease clinicians specifically as we sort of wrap up and I can just open the floor?
Sure. I would love to mention again, let me touch on that in a second. I would also just like to reemphasize that if you check out that Forbes article that I put out yesterday, it kind of goes into some of the background of this, but we are concerned always about these shortages. So while those tests are there, you also have to think about the pre-analytical swabs and the RNA extraction reagents. So sometimes people, government officials and people like that, don't understand that the bottleneck is on the front end. It's not just the test. The testing can certainly be an issue of shortages, and so can the professionals. So there's about 310,000 of us at any given time, roughly, in the medical lab profession, credentialed medical lab professionals. There's about, depending on what source you look at, 330, 350 million people in the U.S. That's one of me for about every 1,130 of you. So that's an issue. And then if you think about, again, these are just some numbers. One person usually averages about 39 tests a year, clinical lab tests. That's about 14 billion tests a year. And so when you throw on this pandemic on top of it, you can see the issues of trying to crank out these results, along with, work fatigue, where errors might happen. I mean, we work 24/7, 365 in hospitals. So we're used to shift work. But if you're pulling, 14 days of 10-hour shifts, it gets a little monotonous and fatigue issues. So we worry about that. So with respect to clinicians and the overall picture, I think what I'd like to say is that we appreciate every single professional in healthcare. They are absolutely doing heroic work every day. And it's not just during the pandemic. The public needs to understand that we're here working with level 2, 3, 4 pathogens all the time. We are not scared to do the work. We just need more of us, and we need to be at the table with respect to the testing issues. Clinicians are doing great work. Nurses are amazing. Respiratory therapy, which a lot of people didn't understand, that's an entire professional uh, slant in healthcare, and they do all that ventilating and intubating and things like that to kind of help people stay alive. So I would just like to remind everybody of our part of that, and that we are often thought of as kind of the doctor's doctor. Without us, you're just kind of guessing. I know that sounds crazy, but if one of my favorite sayings is that you really don't know what you have with respect to an illness or a disease without a confirmatory lab test. Granted, you have circumstantial evidence. A physician can look at a rash, they can check your fever, they can do those types of things, but without a detection of a viral agent, or the detection of a sickle cell red blood cell, or the detection of an antibiotic resistant MRSA infection, you're kind of guessing, or you're making an educated guess. So you need us at that bench top doing that work to help save lives.
I think there's definitely a lot of room to expand collaboration between people in your profession and people in my audience. So I thank you for coming out, talking
Absolutely.
to
Thanks
me.
so much, Grant. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on Contagion. I love your work and what you guys do. We need to get, solid, accurate science communication. I'm also passionate about that. We need to raise the health literacy of the country. So these types of opportunities do that for the public.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, sir.